right, so here's my solution. I'm going to select these three methods: start, stop, and reset, and move them outside of this function. Now, I'm going to replace this dot with stopwatch.prototype dot. And by the way, I used multi-cursor editing here if you didn't notice. So you can see here we have multiple cursors. That's a quick way to edit multiple items at the same time. The way you do this is you select something and then press Command and D on Mac or Control D on Windows. Actually, I'm not quite sure about the shortcut on Windows because I don't use Windows. But if you look at the top menu, under the selection menu, look, this is the shortcut I'm referring to, add next occurrence. So you select something. Here I have selected stopwatch.prototype. Now we press Command and D. And here we have another selection, one more time. And this is the third selection. Now we can replace all of this together or revert it back. Okay, so these methods are now on the prototype for the stopwatch. As you can see, running is not defined anywhere in this function. It's defined here, and we don't have access to that. That's why we need to define this as a read-only property, just like how we have exposed the duration variable as a read-only property here. We need to expose these other variables as read-only properties. Now, the problem with this is that it's going to pollute the interface of the stopwatch. In our previous implementation, our stopwatch had only 4 public members, 3 methods, start, stop, and reset, and 1 public property, that's the duration. Now we're going to add 3 extra properties, and this is going to pollute the interface of stopwatch. And this is against the idea of abstraction in object-oriented programming. Because as we explained earlier, we want to keep the interface of our objects clean and simple, just like a DVD player. We don't want to expose all the details to the outside. So now let's define 3 public properties. Actually, to save time, I'm going to duplicate this a couple times. Now we want to expose start time, and here we want to return start time. Next, we want to expose end time. Here I'm going to use multi-cursor editing. Look, I've selected both duration instances, and I'm going to replace them with end time. One more time. This time I'm going to expose running. Okay, now back to our prototype methods. So here I'm going to replace running with this dot running, and start time with this dot start time. I'm going to make the same changes to the other methods. So here in the stop method. All right, so here's what we have now. Now there's a tricky situation here. In the stop method and the last line, we're adding the seconds to the duration. Now duration is a public read-only property. So I cannot modify it like this because currently it doesn't have a setter. Now, if we go back to our stopwatch constructor here, we can define a setter for this to solve this problem, but this is going to lead to another problem. So let me add this first and then we'll talk about that. So setter, a function that takes a value, and here we simply set duration to this value. Now, back to the stop method. So we can access the duration property and update its value. Similarly, in the reset method, we can set this the duration. But this was a terrible idea. Why? Because I can create a stopwatch here, new stopwatch, and then simply modify this duration from the outside. This will completely mess up with the state of this object. Remember this principle. Your objects should always be in a valid state. You don't want your objects to lie. You don't want them to be unreliable and untrustworthy. That's why we use abstraction. With abstraction, we hide the unnecessary complexity and expose very few members that would allow the clients of an object to work with it without messing up its state. So I designed this exercise for you so you can see that sometimes you make some changes to your code for optimization reasons, but you end up creating many other issues. In this program, we didn't have any performance problems, and we knew that we are not going to have, let's say, 1,000 instances of the stopwatch in the memory. So putting all these methods on the prototype was a very bad idea to start with. It broke the abstraction principle, and now we're exposing this duration property so we can modify it from the outside. So essentially, this stopwatch object is now useless. There is a famous saying that says premature optimization is the root of all evils. And here we have a real example of premature optimization.